A while back, I did a series of posts on the symptoms we use to diagnose depression, but that list isn't exhaustive. It doesn't cover everything. There are some symptoms that don't get talked about a lot, but can be a real problem in depression. Today, I'm going to talk about one of them, and it's something that happens not just in depression. It can also happen during periods of burnout or anxiety or bereavement or almost any kind of psychological distress. It's a problem with attention. And if we're going to get really granular about it, I suppose we could say it's two problems. First, it's an inability to narrow and focus the attention just on the task at hand. And second, it's a problem flipping from one task to another. Let's focus on that first one, focusing properly. And I'll give you the classic example of it. Let's say you have a restaurant you love going to. It's lively, it's loud, and there's a lot going on. There are people talking all around you. But you have the ability to block out most of it and focus on what the person in front of you is saying. It's like you can turn up the volume on the person you're talking to and turn down the volume on everyone else. You can follow that conversation without getting distracted. So now you go through a period of depression or anxiety or burnout. What happens? Well, chances are you'll feel the impulse to stick around home more. Not everybody reacts this way, but a lot do. So somebody says, hey, you want to go out tonight? And you'll say, no, not really. I'd rather stay home. But let's say they drag you out anyway to that restaurant that you used to like. What happens? Well, something that you might not be expecting. There you are in this very familiar place, and the person you're with is talking, but you can't hear them over the crowd. There's a lot of voices at once, and you can't pick out their particular voice and stay focused on it. So you just nod and pretend that you know what they're saying, and eventually you feel like you need to get out of there. You lose the ability to monitor that one conversation. So many people with depression experience this, and nobody talks about it with them. So what's the temptation they experience? Stay home. Why bother going out? You can't hear anybody anyway. The same thing happens with big family gatherings. The person is already feeling a bit distanced from everyone, but they go to Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner or whatever, and there's a big table and everyone's sitting around it. But there are multiple conversations happening, and the person can't pay attention to one of them and block out the others. So they lapse into silence, and they don't want to go back. And sometimes they feel like they've lost the ability to socialize, which is depressing. So it can make the problem worse. Now, some people don't need depression for this. They've never been able to monitor very well. So they just feel distanced in loud places or at big dinners or at parties. People differ in this ability. A very similar phenomenon is when you're sitting across the table from someone, they're staring you in the face, and that's so distracting or overwhelming that you can't think of anything to say, or you begin losing some of your verbal fluency. And another situation is when you're trying to do something like make food and someone is talking to you. And you feel really stupid because suddenly you can't walk and chew gum at the same time. You can't follow the conversation and keep kneading the bread or chopping vegetables. You can do one, you can do the other, but not both at the same time. And what's the temptation? Feel stupid, blame yourself, avoid other people, and predict that this goes on forever and never changes. So what does a psychologist do about it? Well, the first thing we say is, don't fight it. What are we going to do? Say, try harder? They're already trying as hard as they can. It's not under voluntary control. So instead, we adapt. So rather than going to that loud restaurant where you can't follow what anybody says, you still go out, but you go to the quiet place that normally you think of as being way too boring. You don't have the monitoring problem there because you don't have to monitor. There's nothing else going on that you have to filter out. At big family dinners, you give yourself permission to be quieter and sit back and let other people talk. Don't try to follow it or engage them quite so much. And if you're willing to be open about it, say so, often in a light way. Yeah, the last while I'm finding it hard to focus if there's more than one thing going on at a time. Don't mind me. Or you could ask if people would be willing to make it a Jeffersonian dinner, a dinner with just one topic, one conversation at a time, and people aren't breaking out into side conversations. Another advantage of this is that it lightens the pressure on you to contribute. Even if you chip in as much as everyone else, you only have to talk an eighth of the time if there are 8 people around the table. What about that sense of being overwhelmed sitting across from someone? Well, then don't. A lot of people find it easier to converse if you're side by side rather than face to face. So at a casual restaurant, you could sit at the window area that's looking out onto the street, or at the bar rather than at the table. There's something even better. I'm always thinking about the limited energy that depressed people have. If you can do one thing and serve 2 goals or 3, that's ideal. So one option is to go out and do something with the other person rather than just sitting in a restaurant or a coffee shop. Walking is a great example. The person is out of the house, they're getting some exercise, and they're getting some social contact. Does that make it more complicated? No. It makes it less complicated. Why? First, there's only one ongoing conversation, so the monitoring problem is much less. Second, the other person isn't staring you in the face. This usually makes conversation a bit easier and helps you feel less under scrutiny. Third, you're passing things like stores or ducks or trees that give you things to talk about. It doesn't matter if they're a bit inane. Oh, look, looks like the tide is high. That's what most people talk about. And fourth, because you're engaged in something, you don't have to talk as much. People lapse into silence on walks all the time. So walking works well, and for my depressed clients, it's often better than a restaurant or a coffee shop. But we can do even better. You can do activities in which talking is completely optional or more intermittent while getting exercise and accomplishing other goals. Going out together for grocery shopping, for example, or working on a project together, like if you're in a condo co-op, doing chores together, or volunteering where you're around other people. But you have a job to do, whether that's stocking shelves at the food bank, taking tickets at the community theater, or cleaning up the neighborhood. There are lots of ways around the monitoring problem that involve accepting that it's there, letting it be there, and not letting it stop you from living your life. But does it ever go away? Yes, almost always. As the problem, like depression or anxiety or burnout, gets better, the ability to monitor tends to come back. But that depends to some extent on practice. Sitting alone at home, waiting for it to come back, tends not to work. And that strategy doesn't help the depression any either. So bypassing it with some of these workarounds can not only help the monitoring problem, it can often help the underlying depression, or whatever, as well. It's not a total solution, but in the case of depression, there usually is no single solution. No one thing is going to turn the tide. We need to open up the battle on a couple of fronts, not just one. But using some of these strategies to get out of the house can be quite helpful. You can get How to Be Miserable from your local bookseller or from Amazon. The link's below.